When we say that the economy has grown by 7.5%, at a time when the people are complaining about the rising cost of living and being unable to afford what they were able to afford a year or 2 years before, how do we translate that? We have a guest in the studio. Let's introduce him. Ronald Bwosi is a finance and tax expert. He's a group managing partner at Ronald's LLP. He's with us in the Situation Room. Good morning, Ronald.
Morning. Thank you.
Good to have you in the Situation Room. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. Yeah, and that is the hot seat.
Thank you.
And because you're the finance expert, we're not going to treat you like you're the KNBS or you're Okuri attorney.
Yeah.
But we want to understand very many things from the knowledge that you have.
Yes.
Tell us about Ronald's LLP.
Ronald's LLP is an audit, tax, and advisory firm. We actually help businesses to grow to the next level by actually advising them in terms of restructuring, in terms of positioning them, and of course advising them on the strategy in the East African region, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania. We're based in Westlands, and I'm glad to be here.
When you say, I like what you're saying, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes, it makes me feel that if one comes to you, one will leave there infinitely better than when you first came in.
Yes, yes.
But you advise businesses, you
Yes.
advise industry.
Yeah.
By the time you're advising them, they're already established as businesses,
Yes,
as
yes, yes.
entry, as industries. So when you say restructuring, what do you mean? How do you help them restructure? When you say strategy, what do you mean?
Okay. In terms of structuring, one of the biggest challenges, especially we have with Kenyan businesses, we have very good entrepreneurs locally. And they set up very viable businesses. The biggest challenge we've come to realize is that how can they scale their business to the next level, and how can they make those businesses more sustainable and more generational? As you realize that we don't have many generational businesses in Kenya. Some of the challenges that hinder these businesses from becoming generational, mostly dying with the founders, is because of the systems and structures they have, especially in terms of what are their financial structures. Do they know in terms of how do they generate businesses? How do they account for their income? How do they manage their expenses? How do they make maximum use of their assets? And of course, how do they ensure that there is a very seamless system, financial system in place to be able to give them good indicators in terms of what their numbers are saying and how they can leverage on those numbers to scale up. The other challenges they have is the HR systems, issues to do with financial management systems, issues to do with governance in terms of reorganizing themselves so they can be able to attract more customers and investors. So that is the biggest challenge we have, and that is the solution that we provide to these local businesses. Other challenges that also these local businesses have is in terms of compliance. Most of the companies always hope that there were no taxes, and taxes is a necessary evil. So we actually help them to remain compliant while not shutting down their businesses because of KRA has invaded their business. Yes, yes.
When you look at what the government released last week, and
Yes.
these are the figures on how the economy performed.
Yes, yes,
If you look at your own experience dealing with the private sector,
yes.
would you say that you could have predicted that this is what the government was going to tell us? That, the economy has grown 7.5% growth. We have a 12 trillion shilling GDP.
Yes, yes, yes.
Is it felt?
The GDP is not felt because in the past I've been on the media and I've said that the method of measuring the GDP, yes, is a good indicator, especially comparatively when you want to compare an economy with other economies. But there are limitations to the GDP measure because one, the GDP measure does not address the disparities in an economy. You have an GDP growth, but only affecting certain players in an industry. For instance, you realize that the banking sector has grown tremendously in this country. But who are the only people who will feel the growth in the banking sector are the shareholders of the bank, who are mostly top tier persons or persons with high net worth individuals. That is not felt by the common mwananchi. Because the common mwananchi is the lower tier, whereby they are receiving a very minimum wage, and in the face of inflation, whereby this inflation is taking most of their money, meaning that they have a very little disposable income, they are not feeling. So that even though you might have a very significant or marginal growth in the GDP, you will have a very distressed individuals in that economy because the inflation rate is actually eating into their income. So that is the biggest challenge we have in this country. So that is a challenge we have with the GDP measure. I've said that in the future we need to see, even as we measure the GDP, are we able to measure the disparities between the rich and the poor in terms of this growth? Who is benefiting from this growth?
So is there negative growth?
Of course, there is. It can be like a growth, but it is not distributed equally amongst the citizens.
Right. So when we say that the economy grew, then
Yes.
it's actually not true.
No, it is true.
If you take it from where I'm coming, if we say the economy grew by 7.5%,
yes.
essentially what is being presented here is just a number, right?
Yeah.
Taking into consideration
Yes.
the loss that was being made as a result of these factors that you have mentioned.
Yes.
And there's negative growth that has then taken place.
Yes.
It's not a standalone. You cannot take the growth of an economy into consideration without taking into consideration the losses. Is that right?
That what we need to do is how are we measuring the economic growth? Because when we mean economic growth is a growth in productivity.
Right.
And there's a possibility that as a country, because as time moves, we are a developing country.
Sure.
There is definitely a growth in productivity.
Yes.
The problem we are having is how is the distribution of this productivity across the industry?
Okay.
How is it being utilized by the individual citizens? You'll find that there is an increasing growth in the high-end net worth individuals, but there is a lot of increase in poverty because of inflation. So what we need to address is how do we address the lower tier citizens who are not able to benefit from this economic growth because of significantly inflation. Because you see, productivity is synonymous with inflation. Because when there is high productivity, because there's a lot of demand for production input, that causes inflation to occur. And there's a possibility that this economy will have grown by 7.5% as actually put in the statistics, because, after COVID, 2021, we were just recovering from COVID. Most people are trying to get their act together. They're trying to actually now acclimatize themselves with the effects of COVID. They're saying, okay, even in light of COVID, let's go and start making something happen. Let's go and continue reproduction. So there's a lot of demand for goods and all that, leading to inflation. And because of that recovery in production, to address the demand that is there, that leads to economic growth. The only challenge we have is that economic growth. Yes, we are having it. There is a lot of inflation because there's a demand for those production inputs, actually now increasing the prices of commodities in the marketplace. But it's a cyclic effect. The inflation must be addressed because of the laws of demand and supply. Because after the economic growth, there must be now price balance because of now oversupply in production. When there's an oversupply, and then now the demand is addressed, and then the prices keep on falling because of competition. Yes.
Now, this competition takes place between whom and what? Because if we want to do a comparison between Kenya, we talk about 7.5% growth. However, that growth cannot be felt because there are other factors then that come into play.
Yes.
But we are saying that now, in order to balance this out, there must be then healthy competition between products. Right? Is this product internal and external? Is this product, for example, imports and export, or locally manufactured goods? Between whom and what is this competition supposed to take place?
The competition that is supposed to arise to address the demand and supply is both internal and external. Meaning that when there's production, there is demand. So probably if Kenya is producing, for instance, vegetables and fruits, and even coffee or tea, there is an international market that actually demands those products. So if there's international market, you have to export or even sell locally. So both of them actually offer competition for producers. You'll realize that, like for instance, we have now Russia that has chaos and challenges now, curtailing the export of flowers. So you realize the flower industry is mostly slowed down, and there's an oversupply in flowers because they can no longer export, therefore affecting the flower prices both locally and internationally because of the market. Some of the market is shrinking because of lack of that demand. So that competition is both for internal parties or internal producers and both external producers, because there are two types of markets. There's the local market and there is the global market. And the demand for a commodity, because we are actually currently we are living in a globalized economy, the demand for commodity is both local and international demand. If its international demand is affected, then it affects local demand. If local demand is affected, it also affects the international demand. So those are the parties that actually influence the pricing of commodities. Yeah.
If you look at how the government itself performed.
Yes.
So there's been a steady increase in tax revenues collection.
Yes.
Is this a significance? Does this signify that there is growth in the private sector, or is it more compliance by the same people in the private sector?
There's an increase, a steady increase in the taxes, but not as it should be. If you look at the increase in the tax collections relative to the GDP, it's very slow, meaning that we are just taxing the same people. The biggest challenge we have with the economy is we are not able to grow taxpayers. We are taxing existing taxpayers more and more without creating more taxpayers. The most ideal way to create more taxpayers is to create employment locally, to actually catalyze industry and make sure that there's a lot of establishment in the industry locally to employ more people, and these people pay what you call pay as you earn. So the challenge we have is now we have taxed the same people more and more because we have the VAT, we have pay, we have customs, we have excise duty that has been introduced almost on each and every product in this country, affecting the consumption and even inflation in this country. So yes, taxes have grown, but you realize that since even the coming of this government, there's a lot of tax heads that has been introduced. Currently, we are paying 20% on airtime, which wasn't there, on even bank service charges. There's a lot of taxes that. So this has actually increased in the tax growth, but it's counterproductive because we are not growing the taxpayers. We are taxing the same people, therefore leading to a lot of unfriendliness between the taxpayer and KRA.
But see, the government statistics also indicate that year on year, we keep having, government says we have created 500,000 jobs.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like year on year, over the last 9 years of the Jubilee administration, there has, just in the COVID years when the figures dropped to about 300,000, but we're doing 500,000 new jobs and above. What does that mean?
It's a good indication. But relative to our population, it is not effective enough. Because what is the growth of, in terms of even how many graduates are being churned into the industry, year in, year out? So you realize that there is a lot of growing unemployment in the country because currently there are so many companies. You realize the level of growth in companies is very slow. If you go to some of the office areas, like you go to Westland, you go to Upper Hill, there's a lot of free space for offices, meaning that companies are not coming up to employ people because of one, our tax regime, because you realize that the corporate tax, the customs, excess duty, they are too high and all that. And you realize that even the investing climate, now we're having a very big competition from countries like Rwanda because of their efficiency of doing business. And Ghana now is introducing very friendly tax regime to attract more people. So you realize that, yes, we are growing in terms of those statistics being announced by the government in terms of employment rates, but are they relative to our population? You realize that we need to talk about what is the unemployment rate and how have we lowered that unemployment rate in this country, not how many people have we employed.
How many new jobs?
How many new jobs? Yeah. Are they reducing the unemployment rate? You might create so many new jobs, but at the same time create so much also unemployment, in other industries, in other sectors. Yes.
Many have argued that in order to get this balance that we're often seeking, whereby should there be a loss because of whatever factors, COVID world pandemic, a war here and there.
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is that regardless, for a lot of countries, regardless of what is happening externally, they're still able to keep their numbers intact because of this huge production that you've spoken about, that the population then is taking part of.
Yes.
Look at what's happening with Indonesia and Malaysia today with the oil. And they're saying, well, you know what? We are not going at a loss. But what we're doing is protecting our market so that we have enough for ourselves before we think about outside. They're not suffering. Do you think then that manufacturing, production needs to take place in country in order to have significant growth and balance of the same to solve this problem that we're talking about?
That is true. And one of the things I want to tell you is one of the things that I really look at and sympathize with this country is issues to do with infrastructure. If you look at the budget, infrastructure is our biggest expenditure. And the amount designated for the infrastructure, around more than 300, in the excess of 300 billion shillings, designated for infrastructure, is one of the largest expenditure, even second to maybe more than even security and other, even coming second to education. But you realize that if you look at infrastructure, especially our roads, they are mostly constructed by foreigners. And foreigners are the ones who own the capital and all that. Okay, no problem with that, because the Chinese have done a big job in creating the express highway, though I missed using it this morning. So I was expecting I'll use it to be more early. But what you realize that, yes, we are engaging the foreigners to do our infrastructure. For how long are we going to do this? Are we not able to build local capacity to do our own infrastructure and even support neighboring countries? Because we have these many graduates that we are churning out of school from engineering schools, from all that, but most of them, we are just seeing other foreigners come and construct roads. We end up just being, you're just there like mostly casual laborers. But then what did China do to ensure that they made those Chinese into contractors who can be able to supervise a project like Express Highway? We need to see how do we support our young people to go to even foreigner universities, because you realize that the way China did it, they had to sponsor their children into foreign universities, to America, to Germany, to UK, to get the technology that they are deploying now in the country. So yes, it is not bad for us to use the Chinese to do our infrastructure, but then can we really be more deliberate about building local capacity so that we can be able to create local jobs? Because we are going to talk about this high unemployment rate, but at the same time we are exporting jobs, because we are saying we don't have capacity. Can there be deliberate strategy to sponsor these people to get that know-how, so that in future we'll be able to do our own roads? And we are not going to stop doing infrastructure in this country, because we are being underdeveloped. There's so many areas today they are not having the road networks. Are we going to continually rely on foreigners to do our networks and export our capital? So that is one way of doing creating jobs seamlessly in the long run. The other issue is to spur our production. You realize that we have a lot of goods, even basic ones, that are being imported. Today, we are saying that we're going to import maize. And recently, there was a planting season, especially in most of the Western, the Transoya, and the North Rift, whereby they're producing a lot of maize. But we are not deliberately assisting those farmers to actually have access to those inputs, especially fertilizer has been overpriced in this country. You realize those things have the inputs for production, feeds and all that have been overpriced. Then now rendering our economy reliant on imports. Soon we are going to talk about importing maize, importing chicken. Now we're going to import milk. In spite of now being a rain season, you expect feeds are available. Because we are not actually deliberate about spurring productivity locally. You look at the manufacturing industry, it's actually now most people find it easier to import goods and package them. Like sugar now, the sugar industry is dying. The next thing is to rely on imports. On imported. That is going to affect the local jobs creation. And that is the problem, whereby we're going to record growth, especially in the roads construction, growth in the banking industry, but no growth in employment relative to the growth in the population.
Let's take a quick break. Ronald Bwosi is a finance and tax expert. He is also the managing partner of Ronald's LLP. He's here. We're talking about economic growth in the country. Is there real economic growth? The government says the economy is growing. Many people will tell you, we're not feeling it. So how do we bridge that gap? 27 minutes to 8.
This is the Situation Room.
And it continues. We're talking about economic growth, real or imagined. With us in the studio is Ronald Bwosi. He's a finance and tax expert, managing partner at Ronald's LLP. So we have basically seen the government says this has happened, and we're looking at sector by sector. So the manufacturing sector has recorded some bit of growth.
Yes.
Obviously, you'd expect, because 2020 industries had shut down because of the lockdown, then you'd see some resurgence. But overall, the economic growth in the manufacturing sector has actually been declining.
Yes.
If you look into the last 7 years, what does that say about the health of Kenya's economy?
I think in terms of the manufacturing sector, I would say probably the growth between 2020 and 2021 was more of a compensating factor. Compensating in the sense that because most of the manufacturing was on a slowdown, especially during COVID. Even though manufacturing wasn't shut down, there wasn't a lot of consumption for some items of production. So because of that, there was a slowdown in the manufacturing sector. So 2020 there was more of a compensating growth. Actually, industries trying to now catch up with the production, the demand that was there in the previous year. And then, of course, also we need to consider the manufacturing, especially in the PPEs, that is not likely to recur because most companies invested in the manufacturing of PPEs, and thanks to the Ministry of Health that say that you need to have locally produced PPEs that are able to export it to other countries. So you realize that this could be actually very contributory factors to the manufacturing growth, but you realize that PPEs is not a long-term manufacturing, idea that is going to be there for long. But thanks to now we have the Moderna guys now trying to set up a manufacturing factory in Kenya in order to make sure that there is productivity for the vaccines, in the country. So probably that is also going to spur the productivity in especially manufacturing.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think then it's dependent on other factors.
Yeah.
Just earlier this morning, we were talking about the fact that South Africa is struggling and saying, you know what, here we have this plant, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
However, if you don't buy from us,
Yes.
it's essentially going to shut down.
Yeah.
Even if there's need on the African continent to say we need vaccines or we need that production to take place on the continent, if you do not buy and then donate, then there's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And then here we are saying that in Kenya the same thing could save the situation, and we see a problem already in South Africa.
Yeah, of course, the issue we have is, but Kenya, we are sitting at a very unique position compared to South Africa. So I hope that the position not recur, because we have a very vibrant East African community. So you're looking at putting up a manufacturing in Kenya, you're looking at the larger market. You're not just looking at Kenya as a country. So you're looking at how is the East African community connected and how you're able to unlock the market that is there within the East African community. You're looking at Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania. Of course, you're looking at maybe Congo now coming part of East African community, and Southern Sudan is really a good gesture in terms of growing the East African market. And of course, the biggest challenge we have in Africa is the fragmentation in the countries. You realize that because Africa is not trading with each other so much, you realize that that is affecting manufacturing in Africa. Because if you put up a manufacturing plant in Kenya, like what you're putting up with the vaccine, what is the extent of the market? You realize that you go to China, it's quite a big market. You go to other countries like America, it's a huge market comparatively to just a country in Africa. So Africa can only be strong if it trades with each other.
Sure.
And we hope that the recently inaugurated African Free Trade Area Agreement in Ghana is actually going to encourage that, so that if Kenya puts up a vaccine factory, it's not only going to be used locally.
Of course.
It's going to use in the East African region, and of course even the Central Africa region and other parts of the West African region. Because I don't know what is happening in Nigeria, but if this market could be unlocked and bundled together, it could offer an incentive for having manufacturing industries set up in Kenya as a region.
You know, this discussion about Africa trading with itself is a good one. That's why the Africa Free Trade Area discussion within the AU has been taking place for a very long time. On paper, in theory, you cannot ask. You talk about a billion-strong population within the continent. It's an excellent idea.
Yes.
But if the process of manufacturing itself is expensive, case in point, Kenya. these power costs that we keep talking about,
yes.
How do we become competitive? I'm speaking as a layman here, of course.
Yes.
How do we become competitive when our power costs are what they are? They are exorbitant, not expensive, exorbitant.
Exorbitant, yes.
We talk about, in this economic survey report that was written, you're talking about a problem with what? Geothermal power, which is considered to be extremely expensive, and yet that is the power that we seem to draw most from. So the logic escapes me. There's something that I don't understand. I would have assumed that if the cost of power was produced, the ripple effect would be clear.
Yes.
Cost of manufacturing will go down, cost of goods will go down, and of necessity, they would become competitive. But this doesn't seem to be the case.
Yes. Yeah, power is also, I agree with you, power is a very big contributory in terms of just trying to spur up manufacturing. But in Kenya, we're not really, yes, there's a problem in terms of the cost of power. And I believe that the government has been very deliberate in trying to correct the cost of power by giving various incentives and all that. But the beauty about it is sustainability. You go to other countries like Nigeria, they have a challenge in terms of even the availability of power.
I think it's more than a challenge.
It's more of a
crisis.
Serious.
A huge market, but without power, which is a really big enabling.
And yet they export their power.
So they have a big challenge. So in Kenya, we have put some right measures in place. One of it is power. Infrastructure is also a very good thing in Kenya. Just looking at the infrastructure that's been put into place to try to enable the movement of goods from one region to another. And of course, connectivity with other countries has also been a very major boost. Technology, which is also a very major influencer of productivity, is also a very good investment that the country is making in. But then the challenge we have is just to ensure that there is enough labor, and labor that is more of able to do simple things. That's thanks to the competence-based curriculum, is going to address this issue of labor gaps. Because how did countries like China grow to be powerhouse in productivity? Is available labor, and of course making that labor not to be so expensive. How you make that labor not to be so expensive is reduce the cost of living, because you cannot pay people minimum wage and expect that they are going to live in deplorable situation and offer labor to this industry. It's to correct the cost of living, offer education to these people, offer good health, offer available food and housing, so that they are able to work free. And even if you give them a minimum salary, they're just able to cover for their few necessities, then it's going to address the issue of labor and all that.
Pardon me for belaboring the point, no pun intended. But sticking on this manufacturing issue, if we look around the world, take your pick, whether you want to look at what happened with the Industrial Revolution, whether you want to look at what happened in China after pulling its people out of poverty, wherever you look, and you look at countries that have developed economically, the thing that they did was manufacture. Initially for the local population, the surplus is now what then was used to supply to the rest of the world. Now, if we want to localize this same thing, from the statistic that Eric gave, Nairobi bears the responsibility for, bringing in much of the revenue in the country. Do you think, or how would it look, suggested that there needs to be a distribution of this same manufacturing so that you have other pop-up cities, other pop-up regions within the country that then can contribute significantly, whether we're looking at the eastern part of the country whereby the port is located, whether you're looking at the breadbasket in the western part of the country, saying that everybody then now contributes and making or putting up the infrastructure that would require or even demand such things to take place. Would all of these not then contribute to growth for the country?
I agree with you. One of the things that that we need to do as a country is to distribute manufacturing, because I believe the opportunity and the potential we have in this country, we have not even scratched the surface. If you look at the way the country is spread out, and we look at what we're calling the special economic zones that the country is coming up with, the government is coming up with, so that to spur productivity across the country. There is the government has gazetted various special economic zones that gives very good tax incentives for companies willing to invest in those regions. But the challenge is there's been an awareness in terms of are the manufacturers and even those investors aware of this special economic zone? But then have they also created enabling environment in those particular special economic zones? Because I've queried even, for instance, why should we have everything in Kenya concentrated around Nairobi? Why should we have the judiciary, the parliament, all of them, the
main government offices,
all of them concentrated within Nairobi? Part of the distribution, because you see, for you to actually grow certain economic zones, you need to introduce populations and the infrastructure in those. So to be able to do that, you need to spread out the government administrative offices, so that you create population in that place, and then that population is also anchored on infrastructure. Then that infrastructure, because of that population and infrastructure, then the manufacturing will sprout out, because to support that particular population before even looking out to the international market.
Sure.
So yes, we are saying that we have these gazetted special economic zones, but what infrastructure has been created in those special economic zones, and even are we still concentrating everything around Nairobi and expecting people to go to the remote areas for production?
What you say, I like the vigor and the energy with which you've said it. Spot on.
Yeah.
But the special economic zones are not only within Nairobi.
Yes.
That is a fact.
Yes.
Fact number 2, yes, CBC offers the gateway to, should we say, looking at our primary education and focusing it on something that may be relevant to us.
Yes.
But the tertiary education and colleges and universities, where the specialized training for what you speak of,
yes,
that is something that has been a point of discussion.
Yes.
The actualization is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Why do I say this? If you look at the AGOA project that came to Kenya, it took the view of the very thing that you're saying, that local talents would be spurred on, technical abilities would be spurred on, and indigenous individuals would be able to grow businesses. But then what happened? We simply imported manufacturers from other parts of the world to come and work here.
Yes.
And it's only our people who knew how to move a sewing machine and people who knew how to do manual menial work that actually benefited. So the AGOA program didn't achieve what was supposed to achieve.
Yes.
So in the absence, right now, Kenya Pipeline Company is still in court with one of the subcontractors. Why? Because they claim they actually did some technical work which was required with the pipeline and the piping and what have you and the welding and so forth.
Yeah.
But that was because we didn't have the expertise. And yet we have institutions that could have been upgraded to do this. So long as it's a discussion, we can have even 150 special economic zones, but not much will change if the training doesn't go full circle, where it starts with CBC, tertiary, college, university, the whole caboodle. Because when you have that sort of training, people then get attached to institutions where these things are done. So they do know, whether it's in country or outside the country. Now, you advise businesses. You understand the country, because you can't advise businesses without understanding the country. What would you say is the government's intention? Because that's clear. But how do we know that this intention will become a reality? Because so long as it's an intention, the archives of all our ministries are full of these projects, full of findings, full of to bursting.
Yes.
But we're still where we are. Question: what should be done? You are the strategist and you're the person who advises.
By the government or by the...
No, when you advise individual businesses, it enables them to also talk with the government, because the decisions and the policies that influence their lives come from government.
What I look at in this country, because mostly when you talk about unemployment in this country, it's something that is really hyped. But when you look at unemployment in this country, I always say that the biggest challenge with this country is not necessarily unemployment, it's also a skills gap. In terms of those people who are looking for employment, are they capacitated to? I always say that there is unemployment until you are looking for an employee, especially a specialized technical person. You can really suffer looking for somebody to do. In fact, I always say sometimes I'll sit in my office on a Saturday to interview so many people, almost 20 people or 30, but you don't get the skills and experience that you desire, because our schools and tertiary educations have been converted into businesses, whereby there is no value that is being transitioned into the students. So you realize that the biggest, what we need to do to address the economy, and I like what you're saying, because what we are teaching in schools is people to be to look for an employment, but not necessarily with the solutions, just to be paid. Because people say that employment is like a reward. It's not like an opportunity for you to put your skills into practice. That's why people are hopping from one job to this, because they're not passionate and they're not endowed with certain skills. So what is required is to ensure that now, and this should be, I know it is part of the government institution, especially when I look at the competence-based curriculum, which actually the effect is going to take a long time. But of course, capacitating our tertiary institutions to ensure that they are able to offer people with employable skills and also teach them on how to run businesses. Because business, in terms of running a company in this country, you learn by yourself. Personally, I learned how to run a company by myself and from reading books and trying to travel and benchmark with various.
You get in there and you swim.
Yeah, and of course, even as you learn, you are whipped by the government in terms of taxes, in terms of compliance, infrastructure, but even the kanjo and all that. They'll have to pursue on that. So we need to actually create an enabling environment whereby the locals are mentored how to run this industry. We're not just going to celebrate Microsoft, whatever companies, Google, coming in this country, because even when multinationals come, they don't come to help us. They come for profits.
Do you encourage your business partners, the people whom you advise, to partner with industry and commercial entities? Because in the absence of this partnering, what we're talking about becomes very difficult to achieve. Do you encourage them?
Yeah, of course, we encourage what we call the strategic alliances. And strategic alliances. Part of way of learning from foreigners is creating strategic alliances and partnerships, especially for manufacturing. And I know there's a lot of manufacturing companies in Kenya, which we have advised. They have created like contract manufacturing contracts with the foreigner companies, and therefore there is transferability of skills. But the challenge we have is getting now locals to work and partner with those people, because then it calls for a very long time of mentorship. So what I advise the local entities and businesses is to create strategic alliances whereby they need some skills transfer. At the same time, if they could do local trainings, especially on-job training, it is becoming now of paramount importance. If you want to actually grow in any sector in this country, you have to create your own localized training so that you're able to impart skills, because these skills are not readily available from school and all that. So you have to create your own company, corporate training to impart these skills so that you're able to move to the next level.
Which becomes a costly thing. I mean,
it's very costly.
I shouldn't be running a business where I'm doing training. I should be getting qualified staff, skilled staff, come work. Okay, you're gaining onboard, on-job experience, but that's it. I shouldn't be having to pay Ronald to come and conduct some training for my staff. Where do professional organizations, such as, I'm sure you belong to the Institute for Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, or the Certified Public Secretaries, where do they come in making sure that as these people are graduating, or as they're becoming CPA 1, 2, 3, CPA K, you're actually getting the necessary skill that is needed for the job market?
Of course, for professional organizations, they have a very limited role. Their role mostly is advocacy and, of course, regulation of the profession, people who have already been trained. But I've seen some institutions coming up very, very strongly to actually condemn the education system and even attempt to regulate some education institutions, which is not forthcoming, because you see, for universities, they are regulated differently by the Commission of the Engineers Board has come up very, very to try to manage that education for engineers. Otherwise, engineers will become irrelevant if we are importing all the engineers. So I believe the professional institutions have a role in terms of advocacy and, of course, to give feedback to various training institutions. But at the same time, the regulator has a primary role to ensure that these courses that are being trained are actually, and I like what the Ministry of Education said recently, especially the Makoka-led team. They say that we're going to only give students to universities if they prove the employability of their graduates. So you cannot have a university that is churning graduates out of the university and these graduates are unemployable. So that the competition among universities should be what is the rate of employment of our graduates, rather than how many have we churned and how much money have we made.
And how many courses?
How many courses have I like that initiative. It is, if it's actually implemented to the full, you'll realize that there might be some bit of transition. But at the same time, even in structuring these courses, there must be a lot of partnership, the way you said, partnership between universities and also industry and the manufacturing companies. What skills do they require? Can they partner to send even some local students out of the country to learn from the best and come and implement this locally? That partnership will help to actually spur the industry. Yes.
Ronald, thank you very much for joining us today. Ronald Bwosi, he is a finance and tax expert. He's a group managing partner at Ronald's LLP. We've been talking about economic growth in the country, and I like what you've just said about, look at our tertiary institutions. Are we getting just diplomas and certificates, or are we getting proper skill? Even if you go to the EPZs, they'll complain, we actually don't have seamstresses in this country. Seamstresses, I'm sure, City, people who are in the fashion industry. They complain about the same kind of thing.
They do.
Sims mtu wa sharahani.
They do.
Ngumu. Getting someone who can just cut the patterns.
Oh, and that is even harder.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for joining us.
Thank you.
I'll come again soon.
I really appreciate for your invitation and look forward to doing this again next time.
Thank you.
Asante.